A dog was rejected by everyone, until a kind woman changed his life. He lay curled in the shadows beneath a broken street lamp, drenched to the bone, his fur matted in thick patches of mud and clotted blood. The stench of rot and garbage surrounded him, emanating from piles of refuse that had become his makeshift bed. He could barely see through the torrential downpour. Every blink forced water into his eyes, burning them with grime. His breathing came in ragged gasps. A gash on his hind leg throbbed relentlessly, each pulse reminding him of how he had come to be here, abandoned, isolated, a casualty of human indifference. He wasn't always this pitiful. There had been a time, though he could hardly recall it, when he had been a bouncing pup, unscarred and unafraid. But that memory felt more like a dream that haunted him on colder nights. The warmth of a soft hand stroking his ears, a child's giggle, a bowl overflowing with food. Now, it all seemed so impossibly distant that he questioned whether it had ever been real. The only reality now was the relentless drum of rain, the bitter ache in his bones, and the savage growl of his own empty stomach. Lightning flashed across the dark sky, revealing the deep fear etched in his exhausted eyes. He mustered the strength to lift his head, scanning the deserted street. The glow of a distant neon sign flickered, casting grotesque shadows on brick walls. Usually, he would avoid any light, knowing that under its harsh reveal, people would catch sight of him and recoil in disgust. He had given up expecting help. Humans had done nothing but chase him away with curses, kicks, and, at best, indifference. As thunder rumbled, he heard footsteps approaching. His heart seized with terror. Maybe the blows would come again. Maybe someone would hiss vile insults, armed with a broom or a stick, determined to chase him from one stretch of darkness to another. He tensed, trying to squeeze himself against the wall, wishing he could dissolve into the shadows. But the footsteps passed by without a glance. They always did. He was invisible to them, just another piece of trash clogging an alley, no different from the piles of rotting waste behind restaurants. He closed his eyes, expecting nothing except the continuing storm and the shrill wind that howled like an otherworldly spirit. Yet, a strangled whimper escaped his throat. This night felt colder than usual, the rain heavier. If he couldn't find shelter, he might not survive till morning. The thought of his own end stirred a quiet panic in his lungs. He tried to heave himself upright, tested weight on his wounded leg. Fire streaked through the muscle. He collapsed with a yelp. For a moment he just lay there, chest rising and falling, each breath a struggle. Cars whooshed by in the distance, headlights illuminating sheets of rain. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't cry out for help, even if help was available. And so, in silence, he prepared himself for the worst. This could be it, the final straw, another nameless, homeless dog dying alone in a back alley. The pouring rain would wash away his footprints, and morning would find him stiff, just another carcass the city workers would haul off. No one would care. No one had ever cared. Yet even as despair sank into his bones, a faint stirring of hope refused to be extinguished. He kept his eyes open despite the rain. A dog who had once known a gentle touch, a dog who might remember, however faintly, that not all humans were cruel, could not fully abandon hope. Perhaps an echo of that long-lost kindness urged him to remain vigilant. Time passed in excruciating slow motion. His leg bled anew, staining the puddle beneath him. Weakness threatened to consume him. His belly rumbled, reminding him of how many days it had been since he had eaten a proper meal. Thunder rumbled again, rattling windows and causing him to flinch. He was on the verge of slipping into a delirious doze when he saw a figure emerging out of the darkness, soft footsteps, cautious movements. He stiffened. The shape hesitated under the broken street lamp, swathed in a dripping raincoat, an umbrella battered by gale-force winds. The figure peered around as if searching for something. He held his breath, hardly daring to move. For a moment the figure nearly stepped away, pivoting in retreat, but then the dog's eyes met theirs. He braced, trembling. Would they scold him, attack him, Or just pretend he wasn't there like everyone else? The figure paused again. Slowly, ever so slowly, they moved closer. She was a woman in her late 20s or early 30s, eyes alight with concern. The moment she saw the dog lying in the filth, her gaze shifted from caution to empathy. He had never seen such warmth directed at him before, at least not in the life he remembered on the streets. She swallowed hard, sadness flickering across her features, as though shocked to see an animal in such dire straits. She closed her umbrella, kneeling down, unmindful of the grime that would splatter her. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered, voice trembling with both compassion and uncertainty. "You're hurt." The dog let out a tentative growl, more out of fear than aggression. He was powerless to fend her off if she turned hostile, but still, some primal instinct warned him that closeness was dangerous. She held her hands up in a gentle gesture, showing she meant no harm. "It's okay," she said softly, her breath forming puffs of steam in the chill night air. "I won't hurt you." Her voice carried a warmth that cut through the downpour. Something about it lulled the dog's defenses, if only just a fraction. She inched closer, careful not to spook him, and extended a hand. He stared at that hand, calloused yet gentle. It hovered mere inches from his muzzle. He sniffed, catching a scent of soap, rain, and a faint trace of something sweet. She smelled different from the usual stench of beer or cigarettes he had grown accustomed to among alley dwellers. "It's okay," she repeated. For the first time in what felt like centuries, he allowed another living being to come close. She tenderly placed a hand on his side, feeling his ribs protrude under wet fur. He winced at first but soon felt an unfamiliar comfort in her touch. She inspected his wounded leg, lips tightening with sympathy. "Oh, you poor thing," she murmured, tears threatening to line her voice. "We have to get you out of here." He didn't understand her words, but he sensed her intention. Something deep inside him wanted to trust her, to believe that this single fleeting moment of kindness was real. She patted her pockets, pulling out a slightly crumpled protein bar from her coat. She tore off a piece and offered it. "Eat, please," she coaxed. Hunger raged. Starvation overcame caution. He snatched it from her palm, chewing rapidly. It tasted like heaven, even half-soaked from the rain. The woman smiled softly. "There's more," she said, and gave him the rest of the bar. "Good boy." The dog swallowed what felt like his first real meal in days. Energy, a mere spark, began to trickle through him, just enough to keep him conscious. She looked around the alley with a frown that suggested anger at the world for letting him suffer like this. Then she carefully slid her arms beneath his trembling body. Surprised, he tensed, whining in alarm. "It's all right," she said with quiet determination. "I'm going to help you." Despite the fresh sting from his wound, he didn't fight back. He allowed himself to be lifted. The woman stood, straining slightly under his weight, and shifted him into a more secure hold against her chest. The dog, with the last ounce of energy left, nestled his head against her shoulder, uncertain, but clinging to the warmth she provided. She struggled to prop open her umbrella, eventually tossing it aside in frustration. With both arms occupied, she couldn't do much to shield them from the rain. So together, they braved it head-on. Step by step, she carried him out of the alley, careful not to jostle his wounded leg. The downpour showed no mercy, drenching them both, but the dog could feel the beating of her heart through her soaked coat. A steady, reassuring rhythm that kept him tethered to consciousness. No one else on that street bothered to look, but it didn't matter. Someone had seen him, someone had picked him up, someone cared. He let out a trembling sigh, not fully believing what was happening. If this was all a dream, he wanted it to last just a little longer. By the time they reached her car, a small sedan parked on a sloping curb, the dog's vision was swimming. She laid him gently on a blanket she found in the back seat, then hurried to start the engine. Warm air from the vents began to brush against his damp fur. "Hang in there," she urged, glancing back at him. "My name is. I'll do everything I can to help you." He couldn't understand her words, but he caught the tone, urgent yet comforting. The hum of the car lulled him, exhaustion overtaking him in waves. He listened to the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers and the distant rumble of thunder as the car sped through deserted streets. It struck him how surreal this all felt, rescued from an alley after so many months of hopelessness. He wanted to wag his tail, but he could barely move. Nonetheless, in that moment, for the first time in forever, the dull ache in his chest receded. There was still pain, still weariness, but there was also an inkling of trust. He drifted off into a fitful doze, waking only when the motion stopped. Parked in front of a modest apartment building, she hopped out into the rain again and opened the back door. "I know you're scared," she whispered, kneeling by the seat, "but you'll be safe here." With gentle care, she gathered him up once more. He whined softly as his wound throbbed, but her supportive arms made him feel secure. Together, they ascended the worn concrete steps leading to her apartment. Each step jolted his leg, and he tried to bury his muzzle against her, seeking relief from the stabbing pain. Fumbled with her keys but finally got the door open. Warm yellow light enveloped them as she carried him inside. It was a small apartment, cluttered yet cozy. The living area was overstuffed with books, papers, and a tangle of blankets on a worn-out couch. Her coffee table was littered with takeout containers and an assortment of cups. A half-open door revealed a cramped kitchen sink piled with dishes. It smelled faintly of peppermint tea, as if she had been drinking it frequently. Nudged aside a few boxes with her foot, clearing a space on the living room floor. Then she gently placed him down on another blanket, this one patterned with cartoonish stars. "Okay," she said, blowing out a breath. "Let me see." She switched on a nearby lamp, squinting as it illuminated his dirt-caked fur. His leg was the worst injury. Blood had soaked through, drying in thick layers. She frowned, biting her lip. Reaching for an old first aid kit from a cabinet near the TV, she pulled out antiseptic wipes, gauze, tape, and a pair of scissors. The dog watched her, ears pinned back. In the past, whenever humans touched him after he was injured, it brought more pain. But's hands, though uncertain, were tender. She snipped away the fur clumped around the wound, apologizing every time he yelped. Her eyes glistened with tears as she saw how deep the cut was. She muttered something about needing a vet, but it was well past midnight, and the nearest emergency clinic was miles away. "I'll do my best until we can get you professional help in the morning," she said, voice tight with worry. Carefully, she cleaned the wound with antiseptic. The dog whimpered, his entire body trembling. She whispered reassurance, patting his head, telling him he was brave. Then she wrapped the injury in gauze. Afterward, she produced a small bowl of lukewarm water and tried to clean the worst of the dirt from his fur. Her gentle hands methodically removed clumps of debris, each motion slow and deliberate. She refused to let him remain in filth, even if it meant staying awake all night to make him more comfortable. When she was done, she gave a sigh of relief. He appeared less of a scarecrow now, though still painfully thin and visibly wounded. Exhaustion weighed on her, but she rummaged in her kitchen cabinet, emerging with a can of tuna. She set it in front of him, coaxing him to eat. He sniffed, recognized food, and ate greedily despite his weariness. The taste lit a spark in his dull eyes. This was no soggy scrap from a dumpster. It was fresh, offered with kindness. Smiled with a mix of sadness and relief. "There you go. That's better, isn't it?" He finished every morsel, licking the bowl. Then he lifted his gaze to hers. They stayed like that for a moment, two souls sharing a quiet bond formed in the midst of chaos. He saw tears welling in her eyes again. She reached out to stroke his head. For a moment, he didn't flinch. He pressed his muzzle lightly against her palm as if to thank her. "I don't know your name," she said softly, stroking behind his ears. "I don't even know if you ever had one." Her own name was, she'd said, but who was she beyond that? Why would she go out of her way for a battered stray? As if on cue, the phone on her cluttered desk buzzed, flashing a caller ID. She glanced at it, her expression turning anxious, then ignored it. The phone continued to vibrate, the screen lighting up, but she left it unanswered. She turned her attention back to him, "We'll figure things out," she promised, "one step at a time." It was a vow, simple but powerful. The dog didn't understand the words, yet something in her tone soothed him. The apartment was warm. The rain outside battered against the windows, but he was safe, fed, and somewhat clean. That night, for the first time in ages, he drifted off into a dreamless sleep without the fear of being kicked awake by angry strangers. Morning light filtered through blinds, casting slatted shadows across the cramped living room. The dog stirred, blinking groggily. His entire body felt sore, yet the throbbing in his leg was slightly less excruciating. He lifted his head, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. Lined with novels, a wilted potted plant near a window, and the gentle hum of a nearby heater. He noticed stretched out on the couch, still wearing yesterday's clothes, her arms folded under her head. She must have stayed there all night, keeping an eye on him. The faint circles under her eyes suggested exhaustion. A pang of guilt, though he couldn't label it as such, flickered in the dog's heart. She had sacrificed her own comfort for him, a nobody, a stray that society deemed worthless. Gingerly he attempted to stand. His back legs wobbled and the injured one flared with pain. He managed to remain upright for a few seconds before gravity forced him down. He yipped softly, half in frustration. Stirred at the sound, opening her eyes to see him struggling. Quickly, she pushed herself up from the couch. "Hey, hey," she murmured, hurrying over. "You're still too weak." Her voice was gentle, yet firm. She slid her arms under him for support, helping him settle into a more comfortable position. He huffed, letting out a small whine. "Don't worry," she said, stroking his ears. "We'll get you to a vet. I'm not sure how I'll afford it yet, but we'll figure it out. You need proper care." He caught only fragments of her meaning, but her empathy came through in her touch. She disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with some leftover soup in a shallow bowl. It smelled savory, chicken broth perhaps, and the dog devoured it gratefully. Warmth flooded his system, easing the chill in his bones. While he ate, she pulled out her phone. He heard her speaking in hushed tones, presumably to a veterinary clinic. She explained she'd found a severely wounded stray, describing his injuries. She was placed on hold, chewing her lip anxiously. Finally, after what seemed like a lifetime, she murmured thanks and hung up. "All right," she said, turning to him. "We have an appointment in a few hours." She knelt beside him again, shaking her head with a weary smile. "I really hope they can help you, buddy." The dog's ears twitched. There was something in her eyes, an undercurrent of determination to save him at all costs, but also a flicker of fear. Maybe she worried about financial constraints, or perhaps the fear of hearing bad news from the vet. Or maybe there were worries beyond his realm of understanding. Still, she forced a smile. "Would you like some more?" she asked, motioning to the bowl. He responded with a soft wag of his tail, the first genuine wag he'd managed in weeks. She laughed quietly, rummaged around her closet for a makeshift sling. She ended up tearing an old bed sheet into strips, carefully guiding them under the dog's belly so she could lift some of his weight off his wounded leg. "Let's try taking you out for a quick bathroom break," she suggested. "You must be uncomfortable after being cooped up all night." It was an awkward process, but she was endlessly patient. Step by step, they made it to the hallway, then out the door. The morning air was crisp, a gentle breeze rustling the trees lining the street. The dog's legs threatened to buckle under him, but with support, he managed a few shaky steps. Neighbors passed by, some casting curious glances, but no one stopped to ask questions. Perhaps they were used to his quiet but compassionate demeanor. Perhaps they had seen stray animals wandering before. Regardless, the dog was grateful not to have to face any hostility. Once he'd taken care of his immediate needs, helped him back inside. The short excursion drained him. By the time she set him on the blanket again, he was panting, sides heaving. She patted his head. "You did great." Her words, soft yet affirming, washed over him. He allowed his eyes to close, resting for what felt like minutes but could have been an hour. By the time she announced it was nearly time to leave for the vet, he had regained a tiny spark of energy. Carefully wrapped him in a larger blanket, lifting him into her arms. Though tall for a woman, she was slight of build and her arms quivered under his weight. Yet she never faltered. Somehow, she managed to balance him while locking her apartment door. Then they were on their way, descending the steps, heading to the car again. The drive was a blur. City streets, honking horns, bright billboards, none of it made sense to him. He focused on the hum of the engine, the vibration of the seat beneath him, and the unwavering presence of at the wheel. She occasionally turned her head to check on him, offering a soft smile. When they arrived at the clinic, the atmosphere changed. The sterile smell of disinfectant and the chorus of distressed meows and barks struck a chord of anxiety in his canine senses. Typically, such a place would terrify him, but he was too weak to resist. Carried him through the doors, where a receptionist glanced up, eyes brimming with concern at the sight of his battered form. They were ushered into an examination room quickly. A veterinarian with kind eyes appeared, a middle-aged man wearing a lab coat and a stethoscope. He introduced himself too, then knelt down to greet the dog. "Let's see what we have here," he murmured, carefully running his hands along the dog's flank, feeling the protrusion of ribs. "He's severely underweight, and this leg." He unwrapped the gauze that had so painstakingly applied the night before. The dog whimpered, ears flattening against his skull, stood by, biting her lip. "You did a good job cleaning and dressing it," the vet acknowledged. "But it's infected. We'll need to treat that right away." He ordered X-rays, blood tests, and administered a sedative so the dog wouldn't feel the pain. As the drug took effect, the dog's eyes drooped, his vision swirling. Before he lost consciousness, he caught a glimpse of her anxious face, her fingers nervously twisting in the hem of her shirt. Then darkness. When he awoke, the world was in soft focus. Bright fluorescent lights stung his eyes. He felt a strange heaviness in his leg, swathed in fresh bandages. The air carried a medicinal smell. Slowly, he turned his head to see sitting nearby. She must have been waiting for him to come. Relief flooded her features as she noticed his movement. "He's awake," she called softly to someone outside the room. The veterinarian entered, offering a warm nod. Good to see him up. He proceeded to explain the dog's condition too. How malnutrition had weakened his immune system. How the infected wound required antibiotics and close monitoring. How the dog was dangerously dehydrated. A mild fever also indicated his body was fighting off the infection. The vet recommended at least a short stay for observation, but the cost was steep. His face fell as she listened to the projected expenses. Her gaze flickered to the dog, who stared back, not fully comprehending but sensing the tension. Money was an alien concept to him, but in that moment he recognized that something intangible threatened his chance at proper care. The vet, noticing her hesitation, sighed sympathetically. "We'll do what we can to make it affordable. This dog is in critical condition. He needs treatment or he might not make it." She swallowed, nodding, determination flickering in her eyes again. "I'll find a way," she whispered, almost to herself. Her phone buzzed repeatedly in her pocket, but she silenced it without even checking. The veterinarian gave her a rundown of recommended procedures and possible payment options. Nodded, signing consent forms with shaky hands. The dog watched her, oblivious to the paperwork but fully aware of her emotional struggle. At some point they moved him to a small kennel area in the back of the clinic. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean. A soft blanket lined the kennel floor. He couldn't help but tense at the confines. Memories of traps and cages haunted him, but these people seemed intent on healing him, not harming him. Knelt by the kennel door, sliding her fingers through the bars to stroke his nose. "They're going to keep you overnight," she murmured. "I'll come back tomorrow." He whimpered softly, not wanting her to leave. She blinked back tears and smiled. "Hey, it's okay. They'll take good care of you, I promise." She leaned in closer, whispering so no one else could hear. "When you're better, we'll figure everything else out." As she stood to go, He let out a plaintive whine. She hesitated, torn, but the vet gently guided her toward the door, explaining that the dog needed rest and uninterrupted medical attention. She cast one last glance at the dog, tears shining in her eyes. Then she was gone. The dog lay in the kennel, heart pounding. The antiseptic smell was overwhelming. The background noises of other animals in distress echoed around him. But he forced himself to stay calm. He had been abandoned before, but this felt different. He had to trust that would return, that her promise was real. Hours passed. Vet techs came and went, administering medicine through an IV line. They gave him a more thorough bath, carefully cleaning every inch of his grime-caked fur. The process was terrifying. The water reminded him of the endless rain in the alley, yet their hands were gentle. No one yelled or used harsh force. Afterward, they toweled him off and fed him small portions of easy-to-digest food. In moments of quiet, he drifted in and out of sleep, tormented by hazy dreams of old traumas, kicks, shouts, the crack of thunder overhead. But every so often, his face broke through those nightmares, reminding him that something had changed, that he was no longer alone on the streets. Evening came and the clinic staff dimmed the lights. The dog curled up on the blanket, half dozing. Every now and then, a wave of longing washed over him. He missed the way his voice soothed him. He missed her apartment's cramped coziness. He missed the unspoken promise of belonging, was as good as her word. Early the next day she returned. He smelled her before he saw her, that gentle hint of soap and peppermint. He lifted his head, tail wagging feebly. She rushed over to the kennel, pressing her face against the bars with a relieved smile. "Hey, buddy," she whispered, her eyes shining. "How are you feeling?" A vet tech updated her on the dog's progress. The infection was responding to antibiotics, and his fever had come down. He still needed another day or two of close monitoring, but things were looking cautiously optimistic. Exhaled a shaky breath of relief. She spent half an hour just sitting by the kennel, talking to him quietly, telling him little stories about her own life. How she worked as a freelance designer, how she'd been struggling lately with finances, how she felt lonely in the big city. He tilted his head, listening, not understanding her words but absorbing the gentle rhythm of her voice. Every so often, he placed his paw against the kennel door, wanting to feel her touch. She responded by slipping her hand through the bars, stroking his muzzle. Eventually, the staff reminded her that visiting hours for impatient animals were limited. She gave him a tender farewell, promising she'd come back the next morning. When she left, he whimpered again, but less hopelessly than before. He believed her now. She would return. Over the next 2 days, the dog continued to improve. The staff changed his bandage regularly, praising him for being a good boy. He had never been called that so many times, and though he couldn't understand the precise meaning, he sensed affection in their tone. By the second night, he was able to stand long enough to lap water from a bowl on his own. By the 3rd day, the vet declared him stable enough to go home, provided he continued to receive proper care. Arrived with anxious anticipation. The moment the paperwork was finalized, she helped the dog into her car. Relief radiated from both of them. She had brought an old pillow for him to lie on during the ride, and though the car smelled faintly of old coffee, it felt like the most luxurious vehicle in the world compared to the alley where he had nearly died. Returning to her apartment was an emotional moment. He recognized the furniture, the clutter, the soft lighting. Something inside him relaxed. He was back in a place that had begun to feel like home. Helped him settle onto a new dog bed she had purchased, a modest one but soft enough to cradle his aching limbs. "You'll need a name," she announced after a moment, crouching beside him. "I can't keep calling you Buddy forever, can I?" He tilted his head, trying to decipher her tone, gnawed on her lip, considering the possibilities. "Maybe Lucky," she suggested with a wry smile. "That's a bit, isn't it?" She reached out to scratch behind his ears and he leaned into her touch. "How about Ollie? You look like an Ollie, or Samson." "No, that doesn't feel right." She let out a small laugh. I'll figure something out. He didn't know what she was saying, but her laughter sent a ripple of contentment through him. She herself preparing his food, carefully mixing it with the medication the vet had prescribed. While the meal heated slightly in the microwave, just enough to make it more appetizing, her phone started buzzing again. Glanced at the screen, frowned, then pressed a button to silence it. After she set the bowl down for him, he noticed her phone buzz again, lighting up on the table. This time, she sighed heavily and answered. "What?" she said, keeping her voice low as though not to disturb the dog. She paused, listening to the person on the other end. Her expression changed, a mixture of irritation and sadness. "Yes, I know, I'm sorry, but I couldn't pick up before. No, I'm not ignoring you. I'm dealing with something important." A long pause followed, her shoulders tensed. "I'm out of that life, okay? I told you no, I can't just show up. I have responsibilities now." Another pause. She rubbed her forehead, looking suddenly weary. "Please don't guilt-trip me. I have enough on my plate. I'll call you back." She ended the call with a shaky exhale, tears brimming in her eyes. Then, as if aware that the dog was watching, she forced a small smile. "Sorry about that," she murmured, kneeling next to him. "Just some family drama. Don't worry about it." He wasn't sure what had just transpired, but he could sense her turmoil. With tentative warmth, he nudged her hand, offering what small comfort he could. She smiled, truly smiled, and patted his head. "Thanks," she whispered. "Sometimes I think you're the only one who understands." Days melted into weeks as the dog, whom eventually named Ollie, continued to heal. With her guidance, he gradually regained strength. She took him for short walks around the block, supporting him with the homemade sling until his leg could bear weight more confidently. Each time he managed a few steps on his own, clapped her hands in delight, praising him effusively. He found himself basking in her approval, wagging his tail more freely now, discovering a new side of life he'd never known. During this time, scrambled to handle her mounting financial burdens. Vet bills weighed on her, plus her usual rent, car payments, and daily expenses. She worked long hours on freelance projects, often staying up late into the night, eyes red from staring at her computer screen. Yet she never neglected Ollie. Whenever he whimpered for food or attention, she paused her work, tending to him with unwavering patience. Despite her outward smiles, Ollie sensed her stress. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, he woke to the sound of her crying softly in the bathroom. He would limp over, nosing the door open, pressing his muzzle against her leg. She would wipe her tears, stroke his head, and whisper, "It's okay, buddy. We'll be all right," as if reassuring both of them. It wasn't just money that troubled her. Her phone calls grew more frequent. Ollie noticed that each conversation left her either upset or drained. She seldom elaborated, but he gathered from her tense body language that whoever was on the other end of the line represented a painful piece of her past. Yet she never let that overshadow her kindness to him. As Ollie got stronger, a new routine formed. Mornings found them sharing a quiet moment. She'd brew coffee while he lapped water from his bowl. Then she'd set him up near her workstation, occasionally offering scraps of her breakfast. In the afternoons, she took him for carefully measured walks. Evenings were spent with a second round of her freelance hustle, or sometimes a movie playing softly on her laptop. And at night, they slept on the couch or her bed, and Ollie nestled in his dog bed close by. Every time they ventured outside, Ollie noticed how the world had changed for him. People occasionally approached to admire him. "Oh, what a sweet dog," some would say, offering a pat on the head. Others simply passed with a smile. No one chased him away with a stick anymore, no one hurled insults. He saw new facets of human kindness that he had almost forgotten existed. Yet not all was sunshine. One evening, as they were returning from a short walk, Ollie flinched at the sight of a drunken man stumbling down the sidewalk. The man was cursing under his breath, a half-empty bottle in his hand. Fear seized Ollie, memories of past abuse flashing through his mind. He cowered behind, body trembling. Instinctively stepped in front of him, eyes glaring at the man, protective as a mother lion. The man merely staggered onward, not even sparing them a glance, but Ollie's heart pounded long after he vanished. Knelt beside him, reassuring him it was okay, that no one would hurt him anymore. Despite such occasional triggers, life moved forward in a gentle rhythm of recovery. Ollie's coat began to shine under careful grooming, the once bony ridges of his body filling out with healthy weight. His leg, while still tender, mended to the point where he could walk without the sling, though sometimes he limped if he strained it too much. As the physical wounds healed, a deeper bond between them flourished. Trusted him enough to leave him alone while she ran errands. In turn, he never destroyed her belongings or rummaged through trash. He seemed to understand that this was a precious space he had to respect. Sometimes, while was deep in her work or fighting off anxiety, Ollie would sidle up, rest his chin on her knee, and look at her with those soulful eyes that reminded her everything would be okay. But their peaceful sanctuary was fragile. The phone calls from her past persisted, each leaving her more emotionally frayed. One evening, after yet another tense conversation, she sank onto the couch, hands shaking. Ollie approached cautiously, sensing her distress. She buried her face in his fur, murmuring, "He just won't leave me alone, Ollie. Why can't he understand I don't want that life anymore?" Ollie didn't know who he was or what that life entailed, but the heartbreak in her voice tore at him. He licked her cheek softly as if trying to tell her, "You're not alone. I'm here." She let out a shaky laugh, tears mingling with his fur. "You're right," she whispered. "We have each other." Weeks turned into a few months, and Ollie's health improved beyond what anyone had expected. His fur grew glossy, covering scars that would remain as permanent reminders of his old life. His leg healed enough that he could run short distances, though he tired quickly and often curled up for naps. He was more than content with that. Each day was a gift: fresh air, decent food, a warm bed, and the unwavering companionship of a kind woman. And for her part discovered a new sense of purpose. Caring for Ollie grounded her, giving her something to fight for aside from mere survival in the bustling city. Despite her financial woes and personal upheavals, she found moments of genuine joy whenever Ollie trotted up to her, tail wagging, or gazed at her with affection in his canine eyes. But storms have a way of returning, especially when least expected. One night, as prepared a late dinner, the phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen, exhaled, and for a moment seemed ready to ignore it. Then reluctantly she picked up. Ollie watched her from across the room. This time there was something different in her posture. She stood rigid, her face growing pale. He heard muffled shouting from the other end of the line. She gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles whitened. "I told you to stop calling me," she said, her voice shaking. The reply was unintelligible but harsh enough that she flinched. "I'm sorry," she continued. "I never meant to just abandon you, but you gave me no choice." She paused, words catching in her throat. Then more forcefully, "I have a new life. I can't keep going back to that. Please understand." She listened, tears gathering in her eyes. "I know," she whispered. "I know, but I can't fix it. I've tried. You said horrible things. You refused to change. I can't." Silence. Another venomous outburst crackled through the receiver. "Stop it," pleaded, voice cracking. "This conversation is over." She hung up, phone clattering onto the kitchen counter. Ollie whined softly, trotting over. Shoulders shook. She turned to him, her eyes shimmering with tears. "That was my ex," she confessed in a ragged whisper. "I left him months ago. He refused to get help for his anger, his drinking." She trailed off. She didn't need to elaborate. Ollie understood enough from her pained expression. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. He nudged her and she wrapped her arms around his neck, sobs intensifying. "I can't go back," she kept saying like a mantra. "I won't." She didn't. But her ex, apparently, had other plans. The calls came more frequently, riddled with threats and manipulative pleas. Changed her number, only to find him calling her work line or sending messages through every possible platform. She blocked him at every turn. The anxiety took its toll, grew jumpy, losing sleep, constantly glancing over her shoulder when they walked outside. Ollie, keenly sensitive to her mood, stuck to her side like a shadow, ready to protect her if he had to. Despite the tension, they clung to each other. Ollie reminded of the compassion that still existed in the world. Reminded Ollie that not all humans were bad. Their bond deepened in the face of adversity. Then, one cloudy afternoon, everything changed. Had to step out for a quick grocery run. Normally, she'd take Ollie with her for short trips, but his leg had been acting up that day. Worried he might aggravate the injury, she left him resting on his dog bed with a chew toy. She locked up carefully, even double-checking the door. She never took any chances when it came to her safety these days. Ollie watched her go, tail wagging faintly, trusting she'd be back soon with new treats. The apartment was quiet after she left. Ollie dozed, lulled by the hum of the heater. Some minutes passed. He couldn't keep track of time precisely. But an abrupt shuffle in the hallway outside roused him. Footsteps heavy and deliberate, Ollie's ears perked up. That was odd, wouldn't be back so soon. A jangle of keys at the door, a muttered curse. Ollie rose, uneasy. Never cursed like that. The door clicked open. Instantly, alarm bells went off in the dog's mind. Whoever stepped in was not the gentle, familiar presence he knew. It was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a scowl as he wrestled with a set of lock picks that had apparently just undone the door. He had a rough, unkempt appearance and a tension in his eyes that spoke of unresolved rage. The moment he spotted Ollie, he froze. For a second, neither moved. The dog recognized the sour stench of alcohol drifting from the intruder's clothes. Fear coursed through Ollie's veins, reminding him of every beating, every unkind word from his days on the street. But this time something new stirred in Ollie, protective instinct. This man was threatening sanctuary, their shared haven. What the? The man snarled, stepping forward. Ollie let out a low, warning growl. The man, seemingly surprised by the presence of a dog, sneered. "Snoo pet, huh?" He spat, rolling his shoulders as if preparing for a fight. Ollie's heart hammered, but he stood his ground, blocking the man's path further into the apartment. He growled again, lips curling, adrenaline firing through every nerve. The man took another step, ignoring the implicit warning. "Stupid mutt," he hissed, swinging a foot at Ollie. With a swift pivot, Ollie, though pain shot through his healing leg. The man cursed again, rummaging in the kitchen drawers. Panic rose in Ollie. What was he looking for? A knife? Something else? The dog barked, a harsh, desperate sound, hoping someone outside would hear. But the man whipped around with a roar, brandishing a large kitchen knife. Fear flooded Ollie, yet he refused to back down. The memory of kindness, her tears, her determination, it all merged into one unstoppable resolve. He had nothing to lose if it meant protecting the one person who had shown him love. With savage intent, the man lunged. Ollie tried to dart aside, but a stabbing agony in his injured leg caused him to stumble. He yelped, feeling the whoosh of the blade. Somehow it missed by a fraction, but the man was not done. He advanced again, eyes wild with fury. Ollie bared his teeth. He lunged as best as he could on 3 good legs, snapping at the man's arm. His jaws clamped on a coat sleeve, but the man shook him off violently, sending Ollie crashing against a table. Pain exploded in Ollie's side. He slid to the floor, panting. A triumphant sneer twisted the intruder's face. He raised the knife, preparing to strike. Ollie scrambled to get up, body screaming in protest. In that split second, a new sound broke through the chaos. The jingle of keys outside, the frantic rattle of the doorknob. The door flew open. Stood there, grocery bag in one arm, eyes wide with terror as she took in the scene. "No!" she screamed, dropping the bag, oranges rolling across the floor. The man whirled, brandishing the knife at her. She froze. In that moment, Ollie summoned every last ounce of strength. With a guttural bark, he hurled himself at the intruder, clamping his jaws on the man's wrist. The man howled in pain, losing grip on the knife as it clattered to the floor. Dashed forward, knocking the knife away with her foot and seizing a heavy vase from the table. She smashed it against the man's shoulder. He stumbled, cursing, trying to shake Ollie off. Blood trickled from his wrist where Ollie's teeth sank in, but the dog refused to let go. Moments later, the neighbors, alerted by the commotion, burst in. Overwhelmed and cornered, the intruder tried to shove them aside, but they pinned him. Someone called the police. Managed to coax Ollie to release his grip, tears streaming down her face as she inspected his injuries. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing steadily louder. Ollie blinked, adrenaline draining, replaced by throbbing pain. He slumped against, who cradled him, ignoring her own scrapes. The next few minutes blurred into a chaotic mess of uniforms, shouted questions, and paramedics checking both dogs and humans. The man's ex was handcuffed, screaming curses. He was led away by the police, who took statements from shaken neighbors and who clung to Ollie like a lifeline. In the end, the paramedics insisted Ollie be taken back to the vet for evaluation. He had reopened his leg wound and possibly cracked a rib when the man threw him. Rode along, refusing to leave his side. She cradled his head in her lap, tears falling onto his muzzle. "You saved me," she kept whispering, voice trembling with gratitude and sorrow. "You saved my life." Ollie gazed up at her, confusion swirling in his eyes, but he understood enough. She was safe, and that was all that mattered. The next day, news of the home invasion reached local social media circles. Neighbors who'd witnessed the incident shared the story of how a once-abandoned dog bravely protected his owner. The tale quickly spread: dog saves owner from armed intruder. People were shocked at the dog's heroism, praising him for his courage. For once, the world seemed ready to embrace Ollie rather than reject him. Sat by his side in the vet's office, gently stroking him. He was bandaged and sore but stable. The vet recommended a few days of rest and pain medication. The story had already drawn attention. A crowdfunding page appeared, started by one of the neighbors, aimed at helping with Ollie's medical bills and legal fees. Within hours, donations poured in, accompanied by words of awe. "What a brave dog! He's a hero. Thank you for saving her life." Was overwhelmed. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she read the supportive comments. After everything they had been through, her heartbreak, Ollie's abandonment, both their struggles, they were finally receiving kindness from strangers. It felt surreal, like a dream that could dissolve at any moment. "It's all because of you," she murmured to Ollie, ruffling his ears. "You showed them your heart." Ollie just rested his chin on her lap, content. He didn't need to understand the words to feel the warmth of her love and gratitude. The best part was that her ex was behind bars now, facing charges of burglary, assault with a deadly weapon, and animal cruelty. The nightmares of phone calls and break-ins were over. When Ollie was released back into care, a wave of relief washed over them both. Their home, now more fortified with new locks, still bore signs of the struggle. A cracked table leg, a dent in the wall. But the sense of safety had returned, bolstered by the knowledge that the threat was gone for good. The day Ollie came home, neighbors and even local news reporters gathered outside to greet them. Camera flashes and microphones aimed in their direction. Shy by nature, found herself overwhelmed. "He's the real hero," she kept insisting, pointing to Ollie. The cameras zoomed in on the dog, who timidly stuck close to, eyeing the crowd with caution. "He was abandoned, wounded in an alley," told them. "No one wanted him, but he found the strength to protect me. I'm the lucky one to have found him." Her words struck a chord, prompting more outpouring of support on social media. Offers of donations, dog food, and free grooming services came flooding in. Someone even offered a bigger place for them to stay if they needed to relocate. Thanked them but gently declined, not wanting to uproot her life any further. In the days that followed, the media frenzy died down, leaving behind a comforting glow of goodwill. Donations covered the veterinary bills fully, with extra leftover. Used some of the surplus to settle debts, allowing her to breathe easier for the first time in months. "Ollie," she said one quiet evening, stroking his fur as they sat on the couch, "life feels different now. Safer, more hopeful." The dog, splayed contentedly across her lap, gazed at her with those expressive eyes. She knew they both carried scars inside and out, but scars were just signs of survival, reminders of the battles they'd fought and won. Time, unstoppable and steady, brought further healing. Ollie's limp gradually eased, though it never fully disappeared. Anxious glances over her shoulder faded into a memory. She continued her freelance work, but now she had the mental space to explore new opportunities, secure in the knowledge that her ex could no longer torment her. On weekends, she and Ollie ventured to a nearby park. The first time they went, Ollie hesitated, unsure if he'd be welcomed. But children ran over, excited to pet the hero dog. Their small hands were gentle, their laughter bright. Ollie, once shunned and kicked by strangers, now found himself showered with affection and praise. He wagged his tail so hard that his entire body shook. Watched with tears in her eyes, remembering the night she first found him, a trembling shadow beneath a broken street lamp in the pouring rain. She marveled at how far they'd both come, from despair to hope, from danger to safety, from isolation to a shared future that brimmed with possibilities. Life carried on in gentle rhythms, punctuated by little milestones. Ollie's health stabilized. He gained a healthy weight, his coat glossy from regular grooming and good nutrition. He even learned a few tricks, sitting on command, offering a paw, though never forced him to train rigorously, respecting the trauma he'd endured. More than any trick, she cherished his ability to provide unwavering companionship. As for, she reconnected with distant family members she'd lost touch with, encouraged by the outpouring of support she had witnessed from the community. Some relationships worked out, others remained strained, but she learned to stand her ground, confident that she deserved respect and understanding. She told her story to those who would listen. How a wounded stray dog had awakened her own courage. People asked her sometimes, "Do you regret taking on the responsibility of a dog, especially with everything you were dealing with financially?" She would shake her head firmly. "Never," she'd reply. "He needed me and I needed him more than I realized. He gave me hope." Months slid past, bringing bright summers and crisp autumns. The city streets that once loomed menacingly over Ollie became familiar paths he trotted down with tail held high. Occasionally would notice him freeze at a sharp noise, a car backfiring or the angry shout of a stranger. His ears would flatten, eyes darting. But each time she'd crouch beside him, murmuring reassurance until he calmed. It was an ongoing dance of trust. Every night before they settled in, would kneel by Ollie's bed, stroking him gently. She never forgot that he had been rejected by everyone else, discarded as worthless. That knowledge fueled her gratitude and her determination to never let him feel unwanted again. As for Ollie, he never let go of the memory of hunger, cold rain, and fear. It lingered at the edges of his consciousness, a faint echo that made him appreciate every meal, every warm room, every soft blanket. He had faced death alone in an alley, only to be saved by a woman who saw him when no one else did. He repaid her in the only ways he knew how: loyalty, warmth, and bravery when it mattered most. In the end, their story became a quiet testament to second chances. Strangers who had once turned away from a trembling dog now recognized his worth. A woman who had once been too frightened to break free from a toxic relationship now found the strength to protect herself and her new companion. Together, they rewrote each other's fates in ways neither could have anticipated on that stormy night. One late evening, after a particularly long day of work, settled onto her couch, laptop balanced on her knees, finalizing a new freelance contract. Ollie lay at her feet, chin resting contentedly on her shoes. She glanced at him, a soft smile curving her lips. "Remember where we started," she murmured, closing her laptop. She reached down, gently scratching his ears. "Back then, it felt like the whole world was against us." Ollie blinked slowly, a dog's version of a contented nod. She continued, voice choked with emotion. We've come so far. Sometimes I think about how you must have felt, lying there in the rain, broken and hopeless. I'm sorry that happened to you. Tears shimmered in her eyes. But I'm not sorry we found each other. Ollie shifted, lifting his muzzle to nudge her hand. She inhaled, trying to steady herself, and then laughed through her tears. Yeah, you're right, we made it. No more fear, no more doubts. The apartment was still modest, the couch sagging from constant use, the paint on the walls chipped in places. But to them, it was a palace, a fortress of belonging, built on shared trust and love that had been tested by storms both literal and metaphorical. Grabbed the remote, clicked off the overhead light, and illuminated the room with a soft lamp instead. She laid a thick comforter on the couch and patted the space beside her. Ollie, with a joyful wag of his tail, hopped up, careful not to jostle his healing leg, and nestled against her. She wrapped an arm around him, warm contentment flooding her chest. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, tapping lightly on the window. Long ago, such a sound brought only pain and terror for Ollie. Now it was a lullaby in a secure home, a memory of a journey overcome. He closed his eyes, breathing in familiar scent. She rested her cheek against his head, lulled by the rhythmic patter. "You're safe," she whispered, whether to him or to herself didn't matter. They both felt it in their bones. The storm outside was just another passing show, no longer a threat. In the hush of that moment, the world seemed to contract to just the two of them. A dog once cast aside, a woman once trapped in fear, and the unbreakable bond they forged through trial and tenderness. Though they had each confronted darkness, they emerged not merely survivors but companions whose hearts beat as one, proof that even the deepest wounds can mend when touched by compassion. Rain slid down the windows, shimmering under the glow of a quiet reminder of where they had come from. But in the safety of the small apartment, nestled beneath the soft lamplight, they drifted into a peaceful slumber, content in the knowledge that they had, against all odds, found each other. And that in itself was the kind of miracle that breaks hearts open and changes lives forever, enough to make anyone who heard their story pause, reflect, and perhaps share it in the hopes of sparking a little more love in the world.